Hey traders, welcome back to the FXE YouTube channel. We had a really interesting week of price action, which I'll explain in details today, and I will go through some key fundamentals, do a top-down analysis of both DXY and EU while giving some ideas of what to expect in the coming week. Let's talk about fundamentals first. Starting with a recap of last week, there were two major events last week: interest rates and job reports. Both were fundamentally good for the dollar, and the initial reaction confirmed this as the dollar spiked up once the events were announced. But what wasn't expected is a reversal after. Normally when fundamentals are consistent with the price action, you see a spike in one direction and then you see continuation after. But last week, after the initial spike, we saw reversals. Unfortunately, I don't understand so well the economics behind this price action. The main thing I gathered was that inflation seemed to be coming down, which should weaken the dollar. And this will be confirmed in the coming week as we have key measurements for inflation announced. And then over the weekend, a war started. This could have implications when the markets open. I'm guessing we'll see gaps when the market opens. And honestly, I have no idea which direction they'll be. And then if we look at the calendar for the events in the coming week, the main things to watch out for are PPI and FOMC meeting minutes on Wednesday, and then on Thursday we have CPI and unemployment claims. So PPI and CPI are key indicators for inflation. If the inflation results come out below forecast, then we can expect a weaker dollar moving forward. So now if we get on the charts, I'll start with DXY on the monthly time frame. So on DXY you can see the structure is bullish. We had this huge bullish run pushing price to the upside. We broke monthly structure and thereafter we had a pullback. The pullback came into the monthly breaker block, also the monthly fair value gap. Thereafter having a reaction, pushing back up to the upside with continuation with the next two monthly bullish candles. And then on the current candle you can see that we're starting to have a pullback. So we did clear the monthly buy side liquidity. We came into the monthly fair value gap. There's a lot of inefficiency below, so it wouldn't be a surprise if we came back for a pullback before continuing further to the upside. Now if you notice, I took the fibs from the high to the low on this pullback, and we did come into premium before starting to have that pullback. Potentially it could just reverse and continue down from here after coming into premium. But my guess is just going for that inefficiency. So in terms of expectation, long term, I'm going to assume that EU is going to continue further to the upside. The bullish PD arrays are being respected on this time frame. So I'm looking at this as just a pullback. So short term, potential for a bigger pullback. There's a lot of inefficiency created on this run up. We could clear out some of those inefficiencies before continuing to the upside. Ultimately, if we look at the way structure is forming, the target is the buy side liquidity way up here. So now onto the weekly time frame. You can see that we've created this massive bullish run to the upside. We broke multiple levels of structure, and I marked two key areas of buy side liquidity targets, which are here and here, and price reacted off the lower one. So price swept this buy side liquidity target, came into the weekly fair value gap. We also came above the weekly order block, and now we're starting to have a reaction and what looks like the start of a pullback. You can also see that we've created a lot of inefficiency on the way up. So in terms of expectation, ultimately I expect higher pricing. So I expect the dollar to continue to push further to the upside. But that doesn't mean we can't have a bigger pullback first. So as I mentioned, we've created a lot of inefficiencies on the way up. We have a couple key levels of sell side liquidity. I wouldn't be surprised if DXY goes and targets some of those inefficiencies. So have a bigger pullback, come down a little lower before reversing and pushing further to the upside. Below the current level of price, we've just created a weekly fair value gap. We could go there before reversing and pushing up, and then we have two small levels of fair value below that DXY could reach for before reversing and pushing back to the upside. Or we can go to some of the extreme areas where we have this sell side liquidity target, which coincides with the weekly order block that DXY may go for before reversing and pushing to the upside. And even below that point, we have a weekly fair value gap. Sorry, it is here, more to the extreme, that we might go and target before reversing and pushing to the upside. And worst case scenario is we could even come as low as the low and sweep that liquidity before reversing and continuing and pushing to the upside. So now if we go to the daily time frame, so you can see we started the week bullish with this massive candle to the upside, came to our buy side targets, thereafter reacting and starting to push down on the daily candles. You can see we're getting lower and lower, and then on Friday we had NFP that shot the price up, coming into the daily fair value gap that was created, reacting off of it and coming right back down, pushing even lower, creating the low of the week. So you can see on the daily time frame, for now at least, bearish PD arrays are being respected. What we want to see next is if we come a little lower. So the key area to watch is this sell side liquidity right here. If we close below this, that'll be a daily shift. And if we get that daily shift, that opens the door for price to come even lower. And as you can see, we have a lot of inefficiencies that were created on the weekly time frame, but on top of that, we also have daily inefficiencies that were created. And even further below, so we have this sell side target that for me could be more of an extreme, because that'll bring us into the daily order block. But even below that, we do have the weekly fair value gap. And let's see, below that, the ultimate extreme will be the actual low that DXY could target before reversing and pushing back to the upside. As I said before, a lot of this is gonna depend on the inflation figures. So if that inflation is confirmed to be going down and below expectation, then it'll likely be a catalyst to see further prices to the downside. So now onto the 4-hour time frame. So as I mentioned, we started the week bullish with these bullish candles pushing price to the buy side targets. Thereafter, we had some consolidation, and then we had this massive drive down that created a 4-hour shift. We had some consolidation, little messy price action in this area before ultimately pushing a little lower, and then we had a little more consolidation, and then for NFP we had that massive push to the upside, clearing the daily fair value gap, and right after that reacting and coming right back down, creating a lower low, which ultimately created the low of the week. And as you can see, after that low is printed, we're starting to have a little pullback right now. We've created a fair value gap. I'm guessing, at least for the short term and midterm, we come into this fair value gap, mitigate that, and then continue further to the downside. The key area to watch is the sell side liquidity right here. As I said during the daily review, that is going to be a daily shift. If we can displace below that, opening the doors for lower pricing to the downside. Okay, so now let's move on to EU. So starting with the monthly time frame, you can see that we have this bearish structure, this massive bearish leg pushing price to the downside, breaking the monthly low, and thereafter we had a reaction and a pullback, coming back in to the monthly breaker block, as well as tapping into OTE. Thereafter we had a reaction, price started to push down, we had continuation to the downside with these two bearish candles, and then the current candle, it swept our initial sell side targets, and thereafter you can see we're starting to see a reaction. So just to make a note, I've also took the fibs from the low to the high of the pullback. We nearly came into discount before having a reaction, but this is just for reference. Honestly, I don't think we're gonna have a reversal and continuation to the upside. On the monthly time frame, it's clearly bearish. Expectation is we could have a pullback here. We've created some inefficiencies above. My guess is we'll go to clear some of those inefficiencies before continuing to push to the downside into the monthly fair value gap, and structurally ultimately targeting the sell side liquidity or the lows here. Now if we go to the weekly time frame, so you can see we've been bearish since mid-July with this massive push to the downside, creating 11 consecutive bearish candles. We took out this structure point. We've come below these the sell side liquidity targets. The last candle actually came below the low one before having a reaction and starting to push to the upside. So in terms of expectation, for me, I'm going to assume this is a structure low. We've closed below that structure low, so I'm expecting further price to the downside. But as I said, in other time frames, it doesn't mean we can't have a bigger pullback before then. And as you can see, we do have some fair value that's left behind on this push down. I wouldn't be surprised if we go to target, well, this one's an easy one, the one that was just created. That one is very, very likely to be targeted, but we could also go above that and target potentially the fair value gap up here. That would also bring us into a weekly breaker as well. So potentially we can come into this area before reversing and continuing further to the downside. Above that, I don't really see so much. We could say this is a strong area of liquidity. But to be completely honest, I would like to see this hold. I would like to see price come somewhere below that before reversing and continuing further to the downside. Now if we go to the daily time frame, so what we can see is we started the week bearish. We had that massive push to the downside, coming into our sell side targets. We had some continuation the day after, and thereafter we started to have a reaction, and you can see we started to push to the upside. We had some continuation after that, and then on Friday we had NFP. Price came all the way back down into the daily fair value gap that was created before reacting and pushing right back up to the upside, continuing further to the upside, creating our high of the day, and also creating a weekly fair value gap above that. Just have some consolidation after that. And for now, it looks like the bullish PD arrays are being respected. We created that weekly fair value gap. I'm guessing that's going to be an easy target for price to come to before potential reversals. We also have the buy side liquidity above that. I wouldn't be surprised if that went as well. But the key area to watch is this buy side liquidity, because if we displace above that and close above that, then that's gonna be a daily shift, and that's gonna confirm further pricing to the upside. And if we do get that, you can see we do have some inefficient levels that are marked on this chart. We have a daily fair value gap here, a weekly fair value gap here, and a bigger daily fair value gap up here that we can go and target as well. And even higher above that, we would come into our premium levels as well as our daily order block, which could also be targeted. But for now, I think our focus should be on whether or not we can displace and close above this buy side liquidity. And then we'll also have to keep a close eye on that inflation data to see if it confirms our bias for a bigger pullback. Okay, moving on to the hourly time frame. So on the hourly time frame, my bias was confirmed based on the previous week's price action. So we had this push down, fair value gap was created, we came all the way back up, the fair value gap was respected, we started to react and push down from there, creating a shift, and thereafter my expectation was a pullback before pushing down, targeting the sell side liquidity. So as you can see, we had some consolidation during Asia, and then London session pushed the price back up into this supply that I was targeting. So I had two supply zones that I targeted during my weekend analysis. It was this one and the one up here. So price came into the lower one, there was a lower time frame reaction, and thereafter price continued to push to the downside. So I was a little surprised, for one, that price pushed down so aggressively. But secondly, I was surprised that we met our sell side targets on Monday. But sure enough, price came all the way down, met our sell side targets. It had a little continuation on Tuesday. We had a bigger pullback coming back into fair value here, into the order block, before one more push to the downside, creating the low of the week. Thereafter, we had some consolidation, one last pullback on Wednesday during London session, and thereafter a massive push to the upside, creating an hourly shift with continuation thereafter. We created a 4-hour fair value gap on the way up, so later on price drove down into that 4-hour fair value gap. So this is still on Wednesday during New York session, and thereafter we had a reaction and a reversal, pushing price back to the upside. So continuation during Thursday. And then on Friday, Friday was the NFP day. So what you can see is we had a massive tsunami. So we had a push up towards the end of London session, and then coming into New York session, we swept the previous buy side liquidity, came into an open fair value gap, and thereafter a massive push to the downside after the NFP news was released. And like I said before, I mean, with these strong news events, if it's consistent with price action, you would have expected price to continue to sell side liquidity and then continue to push to the downside, but that didn't happen. Instead, we came back into the 4-hour fair value gap. We swept the sell side liquidity of the previous push down, and then we had a reaction pushing price back up. There was a lower time frame shift and one last pullback into lower time frame demand before ultimately driving price back to the upside, and then taking out the previous high of the week, and then creating a new high of the week before consolidating to close the week. So in terms of I mean, what I'm looking at and seeing right now, and my expectation on the higher time frames, I do expect higher pricing. But prior to that, I wouldn't be surprised if we have a pullback. So we're currently in a breaker block that was created over here. We have some sell side liquidity that was left behind, and we also have a 4-hour fair value gap. So I wouldn't be surprised if we went and swept this sell side liquidity coming into the fair value gap before driving price further to the upside, targeting the buy side liquidity above. There's also an open breaker block below that. We also have an hourly fair value gap at that level as well. I wouldn't be surprised if price is supported here. And then we have a potential reaction from here as well. So either this fair value gap as a target with the liquidity after the liquidity sweep to push the price up, or price to come a little lower into the lower breaker block into the hourly fair value gap just below that before reversing and continuing price to the upside, targeting the buy side liquidity. And if you think back about what I said to regarding the daily time frame, this buy side liquidity is going to be a key level, because if we displace above that and close above that on the daily time frame, that opens the door for higher pricing, and we can safely look for more longing opportunities after that. So that more or less sums up the analysis and review for this week. I'll forgo the lower time frame review. I believe the video is long enough already as it is, but I can quickly show you the trades that I took last week. So my bias regarding the sells was spot on with the weekend analysis. I took a sell more or less at the extreme, and then a couple continuation trades thereafter. One was break even. Well, one I took partials and then came back break even, and then I re-entered, and then that eventually hit my profit target. And then later in the week on Tuesday, I took a break even here. I believe I did take some partials at the previous highs before it came back down and went against me. This was a break even. Actually, it was news driven, and I remember that there was some gapping in spreads where I took a slight loss on my break even, but it didn't really matter because I took profits before then. And then over here I took another sell. I did take some profits after the previous low went. Never hit my final target. Ultimately reversed and took me out break even. And then over here I took another sell. Jumped in a little too early, ultimately getting stopped out before it went my direction. But I believe this is the one where, this is the one where it came back into the 4-hour fair value gap before pushing right back up. And then I took one more buy on Thursday. I wasn't targeting the extremes. I just took profit at the highs, and it ultimately came right back down. Would have taken me out break even if I didn't take profit. But then that was also news driven, but ultimately price pushed right back up thereafter. Didn't take any trades on Friday until after NFP, but when I saw the formation of the tsunami going right into the levels that made the most sense for reversal, I saw the lower time frame shift, took a buy, an early buy at the first demand that was created. And then once it started to drive up, we had the reaction off supply, again reaction off the fair value gap. I entered a scale in, it pushed up further higher. Never reached my buy side liquidity targets, but I did take profits at the high. Both trades are left open, but what I will say is I also took scale-ins in this area. I believe I got in once here, started to push back, came back down, took me out break even. Then I re-entered here, took profits towards a high, The trade was left open, ultimately coming back down and stopping me out, break even, and that's where we're at right now. So hopefully the war doesn't cause a massive push to the downside, taking me out of my previous trades, because ultimately I would like to see price respect these levels before pushing up and hitting my next TP, and then we'll see after there what happens. So anyways, that's it for me. I hope you guys found some value in this video, and also understand better what to look for the coming week. As I mentioned, there are a lot of uncertainties going into next week with the war that started over the weekend and the inflation results that are expected next week that could potentially cause or create relief for the majors. So be safe trading next week, and I'll see you for the next one. Peace. Hey, you made it to the very end. Thanks for that. If you could do me one more favor and click the like button and subscribe if you haven't already, it'll allow the YouTube algos to kick in and help this channel grow. Thanks again. Cheers.